Persona 5 is not only a massive RPG, but one that's spent many years in development. As a result, a lot of unused data remains on the disc. And it paints an interesting picture of early plans left on the cutting room floor. Most of the content in this video was found by the folks on the Cutting Room Floor website, and footage of deleted cutscenes comes from a YouTube channel, Rhythm Straw. Before we launch in, a warning that this video is intended for those who have already finished the game, so spoilers for both the original and Royal will be openly and casually discussed. I'll start with unused game mechanics. The most significant of these is the Confidant Doubt and Break mechanic. Neglecting a social link or choosing certain very bad dialogue options in Persona 3 would put that link into a reversed or broken state. Reverse and Break returned in Persona 4, though only for 2 specific social links and only for dialogue choices. The release version of Persona 5 removed this mechanic entirely, but evidence in the code suggests not only was it planned to return, but be far more punishing than before. There are unused graphics of certain Arcana cards in reversed and broken states. Notably though, these only exist for Fortune, Hanged Man, Death, Temperance, Devil, Tower, Star, and Sun, which implies the party members, Mishima, Sojiro, and the Velvet Attendants were immune to this mechanic. The first batch of unused text implies that the neglecting mechanic from Persona 3 would have returned. Morgana has a warning about it, and every Confidant has unused text for if you haven't seen them in a long time. There's also text for phone calls from Confidants you haven't seen in a while, including for characters who weren't meant to suffer from doubt and break, like the party members. There's also unused dialogue explaining just what it means if a Confidant is doubted or broken, along with explaining lifting the state of doubt, though there's no text for lifting break, implying that would have been permanent. And there's unused text for visiting each of the breakable Confidants, telling you won't be able to do things like have your fortune read or customize guns until you repair the relationship. The implication of all this is that you would lose access to a Confidant's benefits if it was in a state of doubt, while if it was broken, you would not only lose the benefits, you also wouldn't get Arcana Burst. Notably though, in Persona 3 and 4, you weren't able to summon personas of a broken Arcana at all. That is not true in 5, they just wouldn't get an experience boost. There's some unused text from Justine and Caroline warning about this. On the subject of Confidants, there's an entire set of unused text for rank ups and Confidant bonuses for a World Confidant, though you don't receive this Arcana until the ending in the final game. This Confidant's bonus would have been that personas of this Arcana could have certain stats reallocated, and you would have a greater number of points able to be reallocated the higher your rank was. The final game has no personas of this Arcana, and Saturnile is grouped under Fool, so who knows what personas would have used this. All we know is that completing it would have allowed you to summon the most powerful persona of this Arcana, Dummy! The vanilla game also has some text listings for an Aeon Arcana, which featured in updated re-releases of Persona 3 and 4. There are no Aeon personas and no unused graphics for an Aeon Tarot card. And when Persona 5 got its re-release, they used the Faith and Counselor Arcanas for its new characters, so nothing was ever done with Aeon. Some unused skill descriptions imply that social stats were going to play a much greater role outside of progressing Confidants. These imply that certain actions, like going out at night, using certain facilities, or confessing your love to a Confidant, would have been locked behind specific levels of social stats. At this point, charm and kindness seem to be called sex appeal and finesse respectively. There's unused text for 2 additional part-time jobs, working at a karaoke bar, and working as a cram school tutor. There's also unused text implying that you would be able to hang out with school confidants, that is Ryuji, An, Makoto, Haru, Mishima, and Kawakami, for lunch in the school cafeteria. In the base game, the cafeteria appears during Futaba's confidant, and it is surprisingly well modelled for only being used in one scene, and this is probably why. The cafeteria appears in more detail in Royal's Faith confidant, but you still can't hang out with people there. There are unused flags that, when set, allow other party members to follow Joker around when exploring the real world. Interestingly, if the Morgana follow flag is ticked, it removes the Morgana in a bag flag, which is a nice attention to detail. The only time this is ever used in the game is when Ryuji is following the protagonist in the initial visit to Kamoshida's palace. The rest of the party's animations are very unfinished and buggy, so it was likely scrapped, and we don't really know where else it was intended to be used. Some unused models indicate it would have been possible to customize LeBlanc's attic outside of the confidant gifts. There's an alternate sofa stored alongside the model for the sofa in the final game, and it's duplicated 3 times, implying more alternate sofas were planned. There are also additional rugs and bed sheets, 2 of them sporting a Persona Q design, and cat beds for Morgana. Unused text suggests you'd be able to buy a CD player for your room and buy CDs in Shibuya's underground mall. This would presumably function as an in-game sound test. In Royal, you can do this via the Thieves Den. That's everything for the real world, now let's enter the metaverse. Many Phantom Thief games feature a disguise mechanic that allows you to sneak past guards. Did you know that Persona 5 was planned to have one of these too? This mechanic is almost entirely complete if hacked in, letting Joker disguise as a type of guard shadow specific to each palace. Other enemies won't notice him, and he's still able to examine search objects and ambush enemies. Though initiating a fight without an ambush or opening a door removes the disguise. This would have been limited by a disguise meter, and the HUD graphics for this are fully functional. The meter slowly refills while not in use. While this feature was scrapped for some unknown reason, a remnant of the mechanic does exist in the final game. The accessory you get for 100%ing the Thieves Den in Royal has the Not Seen by Enemy passive skill, which is what the game would have assigned to you temporarily while in disguise form. There's also an unused piece of code that, when called, displays a Get Experience Wanted poster with experience numbers tallied up, with Joker's laughter voice clip playing as the poster fades. This actually does give the party experience too. My guess is this was related to Mementos quests, maybe they were originally meant to give experience. Speaking of Mementos quests, while I'll be covering unused quests in a separate section, because there are a lot of them, there's something related to it I find interesting. An unused skill description, Soul Touch, is described as being able to tell who in the real world has treasure in mementos. This is just speculation on my part, but I wonder if the process for getting Mementos quests was originally very different. Once you had this skill, Third Eye would make certain NPCs in the world glow if they were Mementos targets. But what's even more interesting is a remnant of this might have made its way into the final game. There is one very specific Mementos quest NPC. I think it's the one you pick up in the Crossroads bar about an abusive boss. He hangs out at the Ginza Line gate, and at certain points, his speech bubble is coloured blue, something no other NPC has. Maybe all NPCs who were Mementos targets would have had their speech bubbles highlighted this way. And now another unused mechanic, Bullet Hail. But wait, you ask, isn't Bullet Hail in the final game as part of the Tower Confidants? Yes, but some unused text and battle data suggests it was meant to be a regular mechanic and not tied to a confidant, and some early trailers also imply this. Specifically, there's an unused encounter with two Silkies in Kamoshida's palace, and loading this fight will always trigger a bullet hail and bring up an otherwise unused bullet hail tutorial, along with some unused dialogue from Ryuji, Morgana, and Arn explaining the mechanic. The text also states that bullet hail would have had a random chance of knocking enemies down, which it doesn't in the final version. An unused mechanic found only in Royal is the ability to find QR codes all over Tokyo, which you could scan to obtain Persona points in the mobile game Persona OA. But that game would end service 2 months before Royal's Japanese release, so this feature was quietly removed even though its tutorials still exist. Finally, there's this graphic implying there may have been a lockpicking minigame planned at some point. Now we come to some things that toe the line between unused game mechanics and story scenes. The first is some unused dialogue and tutorials relating to the Kamoshida arc. It was planned that you'd have to use stealth mechanics in the real world to avoid getting caught by members of the volleyball team, who'd report you to Kamoshida and make you miss the afternoon. Unused lines from Arn, Morgana, and Ryuji imply you might have been able to visit palaces at night, or at least Kamoshida's. But far more interesting is a set of unused cutscenes in Royal, implying a mechanic probably related to the Will Seeds that would have let you see flashbacks into the palace rulers' pasts. Only Kamoshida, Madarame, and Okumura have these flashbacks, and they're all very unfinished. And only the first of Kamoshida's is translated, sadly implying this mechanic was scrapped early into its conception. As a general summary, Kamoshida's involve his career as an Olympian, up to the point where he harassed a woman and his PR group covered it up, which made him feel he could get away with anything with no consequences. Madarame's reveal that his birth name was the much plainer sounding Ichitaro Madarame, and culminate in the moment where he let Yusuke's mother die. Though, if you're wondering if this would have messed up the story scenes before his boss fight, the woman in this flashback isn't named, and it is very vague what he's actually about to do. Just some lines implying jealousy over one of his pupils surpassing him as she's collapsed in a seizure, followed by a zoom in on Madarame's face where he gives an evil smirk, and that's where the flashback ends. Let's segue into general unused dungeon and battle elements, by looking further at this unused encounter table. Most of these aren't that interesting, except for a few from Kamoshida's palace. The first is an encounter for Jack-o'-lantern and two Sandmans. Sandmen? The battle background is Kamoshida's palace's dungeon, and in the first trailer we see the party fighting this encounter, but in the final game, Sandman doesn't show up until Futaba's palace. A fight with three mandrakes loads a unique pre-battle dialogue scene, giving a tutorial on stronger enemies appearing when the security level is high. An encounter with four jack-o'-lanterns has the background of Kamoshida's tower, and always loads as if the player was ambushed. In the final game, Ryuji's Persona Awakening ends up being the ambush tutorial. Finally, in the vanilla game, there was an unused encounter with a mini-boss Kurama Tengu and two Koppa Tengus in Madarame's palace. This fight was actually restored in Royal. And speaking of vanilla versus Royal, the vanilla game had data, including stats and battle animations, for personas like Alice and Beelzebub that are never encountered as enemies. Most of these ended up being used in Royal's challenge battles, or in the case of Aravaka, Alilat, and Bugs, became regular enemies in Royal. I do want to draw attention to Sandalphon though. His shadow name is Prison Master, which implies he would have been a mini-boss in the Mementos depths. But by far the most interesting unused enemy is a different version of Akechi with a slightly higher level. It's the same as the first phase from the final game, but without Cuchulainn and Cerberus. But the backdrop is set to Shido's battle arena instead of the boiler room, and it plays the instrumental Rivers in the Desert instead of Blooming Villain. Every boss has an internal codename in the game's files, and there's an Akechi 3 and an Akechi 1, implying this was meant to be Akechi 2. Also, the files for the cutscenes surrounding Akechi's boss fights are located after Shido's calling card in the game's code. All of this implies that Akechi was originally going to be fought during the heist, instead of immediately before it. But even Akechi's fight in the final game has some unused elements. Despite being immune to knockdown, in both his normal and Black Mask form, Akechi has lines for being knocked down,
"What? Bastard!
And getting back up again.
How dare you! I'll kill you!"
And he has lines implying that he was meant to have freeze and fear skills.
"Freeze, you fools! Tremble in fear!"
Apparently, if you hack ice skills onto his moveset, he will say the freeze line. Also, apparently, Akechi still has a passive ice boost in his skill set in the final version, even though all his ice skills were removed. Akechi also has a full set of mouse models for the rattled status, complete with voice clips
Squeak, squeak, squeak.
and navigator lines.
Crow's been mouseified! All he can do is run!
But in the final game, you never encounter any enemies who can inflict mouse status while he's in the party, even in Royal. But there may have been even more plans for Akechi during development, as unused negotiation dialogue stored in between Nijima and Shido's palaces has shadows referring to Akechi as Master Akechi and Lord Akechi, implying Akechi was going to have his own palace. Besides the negotiation lines, nothing else remains of this palace besides a single ENV, probably environment, file. And most of its other assets appear to have been overwritten by those of Shido's palace, so presumably some big rewrite occurred and they changed things. Hilariously, despite this still being unused, Royal felt the need to correct the Jack Frost speech patterns here to Master Akechi Ho. And speaking of he-ho, you never encounter any enemies with the Jack Frost speech style in Futaba's palace, but there is negotiation dialogue for them. Rip Qui Hin Futaba Ho. Atlas seems to love writing dialogue for Jacks they don't end up using, because the Jack-o'-lanterns in Joker's Awakening battle have this line that is meant to play but is never called for some reason. Which is a shame, as it gives a little more context on the Shadow Guards transforming to fight you. And now, Unused Personas. Many of these were incorporated into Royal, including Akechi's Loki, though his voice callouts for him were re-recorded. But remaining unused are Masakado, Torn King of Desire, the slime Mara that can't be negotiated with in the final game, Hallel, Kartakeya, Yatsufusa, Hachiman, Alraune, Ares, Hitokotonushi, and Sati. They all have compendium descriptions and arcanas, but placeholder stats and no learn sets. In Royal, there's also unused data, again very incomplete, for Psyche and Orpheus Telos and their Picaro versions, implying they were planned as DLC but got cut. There's also a Neo Arsene Picaro. Neo Arsene is actually Raoul. This probably exists for completeness, since Raoul itself is already a DLC persona. But the most interesting one is an alternate version of Lucifer, listed under the full arcana, and having a learn set very similar to Saturnile. It's also listed alongside the code for the rest of the party's ultimate personas. This can only mean one thing. Joker's ultimate persona, Saturnale, was originally going to be Lucifer. In other battle-related content, we have Unused Skills. Firstly, Trafuri and Triesto exist, maybe getting cut due to redundancy with the Vanish Ball and Goho M items, though Trafuri doesn't allow escaping from ambushes while Vanish Ball does. Whip Strike is an early version of Kamoshida's Tongue Whip, while Lust Sphere or Shot of Love in Royal are early versions of his Gold Medal Spike. Mental Hack appears to be a remnant of a scrapped Futaba Confidant ability. I have no idea what these Adam skills are, maybe early versions of Adam Cadmons. And there's also listings for a few scrapped Showtime attacks in Royal. The closest one to being complete is between Ryuji and Morgana, which would have been really nice from a story standpoint, which has an associated unused skill, though it does nothing, and if you attempt to load it, it instead loads Arn and Morgana's, implying it got replaced by that one. There was another planned Showtime attack for Akechi. Most people assume this would have been with Sumire, as that would have given every party member exactly 2 Showtimes. There are also hints at Ryuji and Arn, and Yusuke and Makoto Showtime attacks, but neither has any extra data. There's also some skill data that, while technically used, can never be seen. All of the party members' follow-up attacks have their own names, though they're very unimaginative. Follow Claw, though, implies Morgana would have used claw weapons instead of cutlasses. The enemy-exclusive skills Trapped Rat, Rakamdra, and the Corporobos Call for Backup all have workable descriptions that you'll never be able to see. Trapped Rat, the Hunger skills, and Self-Destruct also all have skill cards, but attempting to use a Hunger or Mouse skill on an enemy will always fail. As for other unused battle content, you have the standard persona feature of the early navigator having dialogue for all the later party members.
Noir's lost it! Someone stop her before she gets herself hurt! A critical hit! Nice one, Crow!
Along with unused voice clips for the party members complimenting the others in battle, probably intended to play when they get a 1 more.
I love it, Oracle!
Not bad, Crow.
Futaba has some unused callouts for her personas, likely intended to play when skills like Position Hack activated.
Necronomicon, intercept! Prometheus, interfere!
And now, unused Mementos quests. There are 29 of these between the original and Royal. I highly suggest going to the cutting room floor and looking at the full scripts of these if you're interested. I'm only going to be covering the ones I find the most interesting. Loading any of these loads the placeholder enemy, which just so happens to be a level 95 Metatron for some reason. There's an actual Karen, an alternate mission for the convenience store part-time job, an alternate mission for the florist part-time job, which would have been the shop's owner's mother. Personally, I find this way more interesting than what they actually went for with that job, which was just some random guy assaulting people. A youth gang copycatting Kaneshiro, a dodgy police officer, and a boy in Akihabara who's committed the horrifying crime of downloading pirated video games. Royal's unused quests are even more interesting. Every one of them is clearly associated with a party member, and would have required investigating the target in the real world. And all of them, except Akechi's fittingly, can be talked down via negotiation without a fight. In the final game, that mechanic is only used for a select few missions. It looks like it was planned to be used for many more, but what's really interesting here is that Morgana is the only party member without an associated unused Mementos mission. Because his mission is in the final game, the one with the crazy cat lady. I wonder why his quest made the cut but nobody else's did. Even Sumire has one of these, though the most popular of them by far is Akechi's, because it deals with the son of a Diet member trying to get revenge against him, and then it turns out the son isn't entirely innocent himself. A clear parallel to Akechi's own situation, and he also uses it to give the party a harsh lesson about how the victims they're helping might not always be the best people. There's also some unused dialogue for a Shadow Iwai. Before you get the wrong idea, the dialogue options here are leave Iwai out of this and leave Kaoru out of this, meaning it's a different Iwai from the one we know, who is harassing our Iwai. My guess is that instead of a blood brother in the Yakuza, the target for Iwai's Mementos quest would have been a blood relative of his. And while not technically a Mementos mission, in rank 7 of the Moon Confidant you confront Mishima there. Every party member appears in this scene, even Akechi if it's done while he's in the party. They all have a line, but only Ryuji says his in the final game. In Royal, Sumire will appear here if this is done in the 3rd semester, but she doesn't have a line. In the wild and occasionally not so wild world of Unused Graphics, we have some early 2015 portraits for most of the party members. This one of Ryuji is great. But even among the final portraits, some of them went unused, such as Ryuji blushing, Shadow Kaneshiro without the purple skin, Justine and Caroline without the eye patches, though I feel these exist more for reference. Some expressions for Black Mask Akechi he never uses in the final game. A cut-in that was probably intended for the cognitive Goro Akechi after his boss fights, but did end up getting used in one instance in Royal, though cut off. Also, the one scene in Royal where Akechi wears a Shujin Academy tracksuit also has a full set of face emotions, even for those he never uses in that scene. And Akechi's 3rd semester facial expressions also exist for his Detective Prince outfit. A lot of early versions of character models were left in the data. Most of these aren't that interesting except for this very ugly version of Mona's cat form, Sojiro having a very different apron, and Yoshida looking entirely different. But what I find most interesting is the unused security meter images. There's one for Kamoshida's real-world self. By the time Kamoshida's security meter first appears, you've already met his shadow, so you'll never get to see this one. Shadow Futaba has a meter icon in her full pharaoh attire. In the final game, it never changes from her real-world self. And her palace has another icon for cognitive Wakaba. By the time she's revealed to be the palace's true boss, you can't open the security meter. There are a few unused location name cards for the real world. One for Miyashita Park, a real place in Japan that is not a location in the game. Shop name cards for a souvenir shop, shoe store, acupuncture clinic, giant bookstore, and recycle shop, which sounds similar to the one in Yongen, but that's labelled second-hand shop, at least in Royal. There are also temporary graphics relating to that wanted poster Get Experience mechanic. A placeholder all-out attack image reading Let's Fire, further indicating that bullet hail and all-out attacks were going to be combined at some point. Joker's off-model all-out attack portrait from the first trailer. An early calling card with a very different logo for the Phantom Thieves, which in Japanese interestingly refers to them as Kaijin Phantomu instead of Kaito-dan, which is how they're consistently called in the final game. Early icons for PlayStation 3 button tutorials, and other game mechanics including Mission Technic Skill Up. Disturbingly, the textures for the Catherine DLC outfits actually contain the original characters' faces. Enjoy your nightmares. And the texture data for the King Frost enemy has a bunch of Jack Frosts inside its chest, implying it's an upscaled version of the Digital Devil Saga 3D model, which opened its chest to summon Jack Frost as an attack. There are some models for unused room decorations, including the bed sheets, couches, and cat beds I mentioned before. A lock with gears in it that has animations for being unlocked and falling apart. And Loki's model is designed so its mouth can open and its teeth are fully modeled, but it never does that in the final game. While not technically unused, the cutscene where Shido gives a speech in Yongen-jaya has its background derived from photos of the real-world Sungen-jaya area, including a McDonald's. A lot of the real-world buildings had their signs blurred out in the final game, for obvious reasons. But there's also an unused texture naming a real-world karaoke chain. There's also this hilarious face from Joker. From the palaces, the map in Kamoshida's palace has an unused animation of being rolled out and stabbed with a knife, and interestingly, Joker's model has a corresponding set of animations for doing this. Here's an early version of the Great Hall's Kamoshida portrait. There's some unused chalkboard textures that might have been assigned to the cells with volleyball team members. And finally, some graphics that would have made this palace even more disturbing, if you can believe it. The central tower was going to have a bed full of cognitive volleyball team members, and I'm only showing this one because the textures are unfinished enough that it doesn't look too bad. The next two things I point out, I will not be showing here because they're potentially not safe for work. They are a much more detailed texture for the cognitive Arn in Kamoshida's boss fight that has no bikini and more realistically modeled breasts, and a pin-up poster style portrait of a volleyball member, likely Shiho, that, given the room's design in the final game, was probably meant to be in the creepy Shiho shrine. Yes, that room was going to be even worse. I wonder if these three were cut for potentially pushing the age rating. Madarame's palace has an unused, moving portrait of a woman. My guess is this is a cognitive representation of one of his students, maybe even Yusuke's mother. There's an unused painting of Madarame that would have been guarding a fake secret passage, and interestingly, he's smoking a pipe here. The textures for this pipe exist in Madarame's models in the code, but him smoking a pipe was cut from the final game. There's a few more unused paintings, and a very unfinished model of an angel statue that has animations for shooting lasers from its eyes. This feels more like a Kamoshida's palace obstacle than a Madarame one to me. There are also unused textures for an elevator in Madarame's palace. We're not done with unused graphics though, because there are entire areas that were cut from the final game. A version of the interior of a train that resembles the opening cutscene, but that's done in anime in the final game. A news studio that is sometimes seen in cutscenes but can't be explored. An area in Hawaii in front of the King Kamehameha statue that is mentioned in classroom questions. This corresponds to an unused story scene there. There's a version of the main hall of Kamoshida's palace that was probably just meant for testing. An area of the palace unused in the original game was used in Royal, kind of, as the basis for one of its Will Seed rooms. An alternate version of Kaneshiro's laundering office that plays the first version of Price rather than another version. And a different version of one of the mouse hallways in Shido's palace. The rest are just early versions of areas that I don't find that interesting. Speaking of the mouse puzzle, although there's no data in the code related to this, a lot of early trailers show the protagonist turn into mice in what is clearly Kamoshida's dungeon. So this mechanic was probably intended for much earlier, but ended up being moved to the semi-final palace. Royal has its own set of unused graphics. Firstly, every showtime has its own unique graphic, which is never seen in the final game. Some chat stickers that, besides the Morgana one, are all from the real social media app Line. Icons of gems with the minor arcana from Persona 3. The Japanese text here implies the sword would have recovered HP slightly, the cup would have recovered SP, the wand would have multiplied experience by 1.5, and the coin would have multiplied money by 2. A small storeroom in Jazz Gin is technically fully modeled, but you never get to see it. It's also kind of unfinished. One of Maruki's flashbacks has an extra horse 3D model under the floor for some reason. And there's evidence of a few scrapped Thieves Den models, a stage from the series' dancing games, the temple from Kichijoji, and the Tokyo Skytree. All of these have a full set of conversations with the party too. On that subject, the cutting room floor also lists other unused Thieves Den dialogue for objects that were in the final game. I recommend going to cutting room floor and reading this all yourself. The Thieves Den has an unused achievement, Monk in Training, for spending time at the temple in Kichijoji 5 times. There's also some unused songs in the sound test, mostly for part-time job locations that were likely considered too low quality to include in the Thieves Den. The song that plays during Sumire's dancing cutscene at the school festival, a radio-filtered version of No More What Ifs, Ideal and the Real End version but labelled New Bad Ending track, I guess there is official confirmation this is considered a bad ending, and 3 songs that have track listings but don't exist. Maruki's past event BGM, likely intended for Maruki's flashbacks in his palace, Shujin Academy's school song. Either this was meant to play while exploring Shujin, or in canon, Shujin Academy has its own school song, and I don't even want to think what it would sound like. Obey your teachers, you're all slave. Mementos Area 1, likely an early version that got removed. Finally, thumbnails exist for 3 cutscenes that were removed from the cutscene viewer. The Floral Pants Man version of the Yaldabaoth scene, a trailer for the Persona 5 anime that I'm guessing they just couldn't get the rights to, and a cutscene that was meant to play in Maruki's arc that was cut from the final game, but I'm going to cover that later in the unused story section. But before we move on, one more unused graphic from Royal. Sumire has a full set of animations for the second floor of LeBlanc hideout. Some think this means she was meant to join earlier, but one other thing makes me disagree with this. Akechi also has 3rd semester animations for this hideout, so it's more likely that the 3rd semester's hideout was meant to be the 2nd floor instead of the 1st floor. There are a lot of unused items in Persona 5 at varying states of completion. Firstly, quite a few books. Homemaker Hero's description implies that it either gave you a discount on buying secondhand electronics, or was required to read to even buy them in the first place. PT Bible and fan sightings were likely meant to be purchasable during the Phantom Thief Mania part of the story. My theory is these got cut because they'd obviously have to stop selling them after the PT's popularity tanks, and that would screw you out of 100% book completion if you hadn't bought them. Speaking of the story, the Okumura Way is a book that's mentioned several times in Confidants and the main story, but it was apparently going to be purchasable and readable at one point. If this was Persona 4, I can see it getting a "this is physically painful for you to read" description and boosting your diligence. Medtech for Teens, Guns of the World, Shogi World, and Pure Politics were all very clearly attached to certain confidants, and may have been required reading in order to finish them. That, or they just boost the points you gain with them. Annals of Greatness, How to Karakuri, and The Hero with a Bow are notable because they're the only books that have full read dialogue in the base game, but all of them were added into Royal, though Annals of Greatness and How to Karakuri were renamed to Heroic Revelations and The Art of Automata, respectively. I became a demon to find my own path. As for the drastic change in the first name, it's actually because this book's name in Japanese, Ijin Ibunroku, was a pun on the Japanese title of Persona 1, and the localization noticed this and referenced the English title. There are two unused DVDs, Bonehead and Crime Lab Squad, probably references to Bones and CSI. Neither of these have counterparts in Royal. 3 unused gift items that I also don't think were used in Royal. And among consumables, there's a hunger cure that was likely cut because hunger doesn't show up enough for it to be relevant. A cookie that was meant to be obtained during Hawaii, and taiyaki caramel, which would have been obtained if you spent the school festival with no one, but you'll always spend it with either Ryuji or Haru, even if you don't unlock the other options. Not exactly items, but there's some unused text implying that Takemi's confidant would have given you access to injections that had battle effects like preventing HP from decreasing or randomly nullifying elements. Nothing of this mechanic exists beyond just text. I don't know why this was removed, but it's possible it may have caused age rating concerns. All I do know is, if you're ever seeing Takemi, don't request Injection 15, not even she knows what it does. Then quite a few unused accessories. Most of their positions in the code were overwritten with other accessories in Royal, so they're doomed to remain cut content forever. A few of them would decrease the enemy's alert time or line of sight. There were some accessories that boosted your gun clip size, though they're not actually programmed to do anything. Towser's belt and 0 Day Pass give resist mouse and null mouse, and were likely meant to be bought at Destinyland. Their effects also don't work. And a set of 3 earring accessories that, apart from only being equipable by women, don't do anything. What's really interesting though is the Worn Rosary. This accessory has no effect, but the same sell price and location in the code to the other party members' default accessories. And the fact that it's a rosary and Hifumi Togo is first encountered in a church, my theory is this is a remnant of the scrapped party member who later became Hifumi Togo. Just to clarify some misconceptions, Hifumi herself was never meant to be a phantom thief. She was simply repurposed from an unused design of a scrap party member. But it's likely this scrap party member would have started with the Worn Rosary. Interestingly, this accessory slot in the code was not overwritten by Sumire's in Royal. There's also some unused treasure items, the things you find in search objects that you can only sell at Untouchable, including some leftovers from Persona 4. Most of the other unused treasures did end up used in Royal though. Notably, the final dungeon didn't have search objects in Vanilla, but does in Royal, but the treasures you get out of them are actually different to the unused Depths of Mementos treasures from the original, and I really like the descriptions of all of these. They all tie into the Two-Faced Society theme. There's also a final group of treasures that have the description sells for a lot, but implying maybe Untouchable wouldn't take these, or some other mechanic. Most of them got overwritten by Maruki's Palace's treasures in Royal. There's some unused melee weapons and guns, but honestly they're not that interesting to me. American Gun 1. The Fault Knife and Slacker Pole were probably meant to be Mementos rewards, and Haru has a few unnamed grenade launchers with stats placing them between several of her weapons in the final release. They clearly thought she didn't have enough screen time to justify extra guns. Akechi also has 2 empty weapon slots that were used for his new weapons in Royal. There's also some unused skill cards corresponding to various signature moves, and Ali Dance, which was used in Royal as a challenge battle reward. The skill Zenith Defense is still in the final game. It's not learnable by any persona, but it is the effect of the Omnipotent Orb accessory. There are also some oddities with the DLC costumes. Firstly, every party member has a corresponding equip item for every costume set, even the ones they can't equip, but they're hard-coded to not appear in the item menu. These probably exist just to stop the game crashing. What's more interesting is that there's unused dialogue for every party member talking about the costume they're currently wearing, a feature that was in Persona 4, so I'm not sure why this was cut here. Also, Akechi has lines referencing a swimsuit outfit that he doesn't have in the final game, so sorry Akechi stans. There's also some unused data in Royal, implying there was meant to be a Persona 3 Dancing in the Moonlight costume set. And now what I'm sure you've been waiting for, unused voice clips and story scenes. I won't be covering all of these in full, just the ones that I find the most interesting. Joker has a lot of additional daily life clips that aren't used, mostly reading off days of the week.
Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, on a day off, Monday, Friday.
And loudly complaining that something is sold out.
It's sold out. Sold out!
I sure feel this way when checking vending machines. Every confidant has unused voice clips saying, "Let me explain."
Let me explain.
Let me explain. Let me explain.
And that's it.
And that's all,
Is what I mean.
is the gist.
The only one of these actually used is Sojiro's for the coffee trivia.
Let me explain.
These clips may have been intended for when a confidant taught you a new skill. Saya Nijima also allegedly has a lot of unused voice clips implying her confidant was gonna be a more normal one, including a romance route. However, these are not listed on the cutting room floor, but there may be some evidence this was still planned. The menu description of rank 10 of Saya's confidant is treated like a romantic rank 10, with her platonic rank 10 description having placeholder text. This is notable because every non-romanceable confidant, like the Velvet Twins, only has one rank 10 menu description. And on that note, it's impossible to open the menu in between Akechi's rank 9 and rank 10, so his rank 9 menu description is not viewable in-game, but here it is. Joker has many dialogue choices in the main story. For most that only have 2 options, there's an unused third option. And some of them even have unused lines. I only find a few of these interesting. Firstly, one during Kamoshida's arc where you had the option of telling Ryuji you got the Metaverse app from a long-nosed man.
Huh? A long-nosed... Was that some kind of joke?
During the diner scene where the Phantom Thieves are officially formed, when Ryuji asks what kind of big target you want to go after next, there was an unused third option to make a joke about fishing that you'd only be able to select if your proficiency was high enough. Notable since the final game has barely any stat-lock dialogue choices. During the Madarame arc, Joker had the option to offer himself as Yusuke's nude model.
Why don't you ask him yourself tomorrow?
That perv might actually be happy about that.
While definitely not fake Igor in the intro has a voiced response to saying no to the "this is the work of fiction" disclaimer, he also has an unused voice response to saying yes.
Everything that happens from here on is fiction. You have agreed upon this. Well then, it is time for you to enjoy this game to your heart's content. It is said that man has the power to resist even the most desperate of situations.
Unused voice lines from Saya imply that your difficulty would have been determined by how you answered one of her questions. Specifically, can someone's heart be stolen so easily, rather than just from a menu.
Even if you're untrained? You sound rather composed about it. I see. Well, it would be problematic if it were easy. Do you mean that you risked your life to steal them?
There's even an unused variant of the interrogation scene that doesn't include the difficulty selector. In Royal exclusively, there was a cutscene after Sojiro and Joker left Shujin for the first time, reminding you about the deal you made. Morgana originally had a lot more dialogue in the Kamoshida arc about the nature of personas and Joker's wildcard ability.
A persona isn't just a supernatural power. It's an armor for your heart. It's a mask whose true nature lies in drawing out the other side of you that sleeps within. You two seem friendlier than the last time I saw you. Don't tell me. Does his persona grow not only through battle, but everyday experiences as well? No. Did one's awakening trigger the other? Personas are the strength of heart, after all.
Personally, I'm sad these got cut because they're foreshadowing for his true nature as a creation of the Velvet Room. An unused voice line from Justine,
"From this point forward, you will determine which ones to execute,"
is stored right after the unique dialogue for fusing away Arsene, implying that the tutorial originally forced you to fuse him away. In the final game, you can avoid this as long as you have 3 or more personas. Then there are some unused voice clips for Kamoshida's boss fight that imply an injury the real Kamoshida received would have led to a weakness in his boss form.
That reminds me. Wasn't there something about an injury regarding him? We went through a lot of trouble getting that info, you know. Oh, what was it again? Oh yeah, it's the old injury on his left knee. Target that.
An unused cutscene from the prologue hints that there might have been a little more gameplay after Joker breaks through the window. Strangely, the dialogue here is dubbed in English, but the text is left in Japanese.
Why? Was our plan leaked?
Worry about that later. Is there a route he can take?
Give me a sec. Found one. He'll be able to walk along the wall, I think. You think?
Then there's a scene of Kamoshida and some students noticing a vent grate has been knocked out of place in the school, right after Ryuji, Joker, and Morgana use a vent to escape Kamoshida's palace. This scene is probably a remnant of an early draft, as in the final story, the metaverse does not impact the real world that way. An unused scene of Kamoshida and Kobayakawa talking to each other in the faculty meeting room. This room is used for a few other very buggy, unfinished cutscenes, so it was probably scrapped at some point. In Royal Only, there's a cut, fully voiced scene where Iwai notices the will seeds Joker has and says that someone in Kichijoji may be interested in it.
A will seed? Let me check it out for a sec. Super gross. Sorry, I'm not in the market for these, but I can't recall there being somebody who's into this sort of thing. I think somewhere in Kichijoji.
In the final game, the will seeds are turned into items in Mementos, not the real world. Speaking of which, there's an unused cutscene of meeting Jose in the real world outside the flower shop, which only makes him even more confusing. And a scene at the start of Mishima's Confidant where Igor creepily appears in the real world to talk about the bond Joker formed. There's unused text for Igor for all the Confidants, implying that this was gonna happen for all of them instead of the Lavenza monologue in the final game. Some unused lines from Morgana first turning into the Monomobile that's,
Ow! Skull, no! Don't stretch my opening so much! I feel like I've been violated.
Arn originally had a more offended reaction to Yusuke saying he has no interest in her as a girl.
Stop making such odd assumptions. I have absolutely no interest in her as someone of the opposite sex.
What? Huh?
Is there a problem?
No. No, not really.
Arn also has 2 unused versions of her saying the palace's deadline.
That means June 3rd. That means June 4th.
Voice clips like this exist for Futaba's arc as well.
The date that Medjed is set for the alleged cleanse is 8/22. That day is fast approaching. The date that Medjed is set for the alleged cleanse is 8/23. That day is fast approaching.
Hence, we shall proceed with our plan to cleanse Japan. This process will commence on August 23rd.
Implying it took a while to decide on the deadlines for the palaces, or if they weren't sure whether the deadline should refer to the Reach Treasure deadline, the Calling Card deadline, or the Plan Execution deadline, leaving 3 possible final dates. Kinda sad this Madarame arc line from Morgana got cut.
Museums are prime targets for phantom thieves, after all.
Shadow Madarame originally alluded to Black Mask before the boss fight instead of right after.
And that suspicious-looking one. I bet they're your accomplice too.
And some lines of Arn objecting to you suggesting Yusuke stay with her.
No! Don't encourage him!
Speaking of Arn, a lot of lines from the moment in the hot pot scene where Sojiro asked if she has a boyfriend got cut, and it was probably for the better.
If you had to choose between a younger guy or an older guy, which would you go with?
I guess it would have to be older.
Then, what are your thoughts on men who can cook?
Well, better that than not being able to.
Really?
It's just, I'm not really good at that kind of stuff.
These lines make it seem like Sojiro himself is hitting on Arn, and his reputation in the fanbase would have done a complete 180 if that was true. In the final game, the impression I got was he was curious whether she was open for Joker to date. In the scene where Makoto confronts the group, Arn had an extra line.
But someone did. They made Kamoshida confess everything he had done. What's so wrong with that?
Which was also cut from Makoto's flashback to that conversation later on.
But someone did. They made Kamoshida confess everything he had done.
After Yusuke's welcome party, there's a scene in the Velvet Room, and Caroline and Justine had some cut lines here.
Every one of them is garbage, same as you. They could be called social failures as well.
While this feels a bit redundant as they've already discussed this kind of thing far earlier, many feel like this scene is incomplete without these lines.
The bonds that you have reeled in are quite intriguing. In other words, they all have been unfairly labeled by society and are standing up against such fates.
There are also a lot of cut lines from Kaneshiro's arc that openly discuss something that was merely very heavily implied in the final story.
Supposedly, they're being forced into prostitution.
I don't have a thing for teens, you know. Well, prudish ones do sell at a high price. Hey, make sure you don't damage the goods.
I'll have you work at an affiliate store with us starting tomorrow. You'll pay it off with your body. Don't worry, we only take VIP customers from society.
I have to wonder if these got cut for age rating concerns. The Futaba arc has a couple of cut lines foreshadowing the later beach trip.
I was just hoping we could go on vacation or something and have a blast.
I want to hit the beach before the jellyfish show up. I'm sure we'll solve all this together.
That's quite wishful thinking.
In the sushi diner scene, when Ryuji wonders about Alibaba possibly being Sojiro's ex-wife, he had another line that I'm really sad was cut.
You know how much he loves the ladies? That's gotta be it. I'm totally a super detective.
And some lines implying that where you enter a palace from in the real world affects where you start in the palace.
When we go back, we don't need to do it from the front of her door like yesterday, right? It'd suck if we have to do another trip with no AC.
Which is not true of the final story. In Royal Only, there are some fully voice-acted cutscenes where Sojiro gives the group tickets to Tokyo Skytree as a thank you for helping Futaba, and they all hang out there. Apparently this is a scene from the anime, but I wouldn't know as I heard terrible things about the anime.
Whoa, we're so high up! The cars look tiny! Actually, this is making me kinda nervous.
I can't stop thinking about Medjed's deadline.
Has there been any move made on their part?
None so far.
I worry about it now. I mean, boss went out of his way to give us these tickets. The least we can do is enjoy our time here.
Agreed.
There's an unused cutscene for the Hawaii trip where the party visits the Kamehameha statue. It's fully dubbed, but some of the voice lines don't match the text.
Forget that.
What were all those pamphlets for? Do some research before you recommend a place. Well, that was a waste of time. Signing off.
I presume this was cut because it ends with even the characters admitting it was pointless, but it does have some fun moments.
The raised right hand and the spear in his left, his sharp gaze piercing the horizon. So this is the Aloha spirit.
Inari is the epitome of a Japanese weirdo.
A cutscene from the Okumura arc would have showed Akechi taking photos of the thieves leaving the palace. I presume this scene was cut to make his later blackmail more surprising. A short cutscene was removed from after Joker's arrest, where two normal police officers discuss what it felt like to be part of that ambush mission in the metaverse. It's less than a minute and offers a perspective we never see in the final story, so I'm sad this was lost.
Man, that was a weird mission. I didn't think we'd get intel on exactly where the thief would be.
I've never seen anything quite like it myself. Having us split into two thin squadrons, take one designated path, get into position, then wait? Pretty bizarre if you ask me.
And that casino too. Do you think it was some kind of illusion?
Keep your voice down. We're not supposed to be discussing this.
In the Shido arc, there's an unused cutscene of the current Prime Minister panicking about Shido's rising popularity. And now I have to address an elephant in the room. There are YouTube clips going around of an unused, expanded version of the scene where the girls beat up Ryuji. I can't find this scene documented on any cut content websites, nor can I find any non-anecdotal evidence of these voice clips and animations existing in the game's code. Because this scene is such a controversy magnet in the Western fandom, I don't want to say anything about this scene without more evidence. In the vanilla game's final arc, there's an unused, fully dubbed scene where the Phantom Thieves discuss the merits of erasing the entire metaverse versus continuing to target specific criminals.
It's true that even if we erase the metaverse, there's no assurance that the world will get better. And if we lose our powers, we won't be able to stand up against criminals like Shido ever again.
So we should be targeting criminals and not the general public, huh?
Guys.
You know what? He's right. This is where I belong. I want to continue being part of the Phantom Thieves.
My thoughts exactly. I will defer to our leader's decision. So, any objections?
Then we'll continue on as Phantom Thieves together?
Given the way this scene plays out, implying the protagonist made a choice here, it's likely this was a scenario meant to lead to a bad ending. Speaking of which, there's also an unused missed deadline game over for this arc, which is impossible to see as there's no way to fail the deadline in the final game. Remember that Unused Thieves Den cutscene I said I'd get back to later? Well, there's a full anime movie that's meant to play at the start of the 3rd semester. The weird thing is, it was in the trailers.
I'm responsible for crushing that dream.
But for some reason it was cut from the final game and from the Thieves Den. There's a lot of unused cutscenes from the reveal of Sumire's true past, which apparently featured a limousine? The rest of the unused cutscenes for Maruki's palace are unfinished versions of final ones, but in the real world there are unused voice clips corresponding to alternate versions of the scenes where Joker talks to everyone in the party, about how their lives are under Maruki's reality. The interesting part is, the party members were much more confrontational about Joker saying they were living a lie.
How am I running from something right now?
Shiho's back, we're happier than ever, nothing bad's happening, so what's so wrong with that?
I'm happy right where I am. So are you telling me that's wrong? Why are you being so mean to me? Is it wrong that we're all happy together as a family? That's a horrible thing to say to me, even if it's a joke. I'm happy right now. Are you saying that I shouldn't be feeling this way?
I'm happy right now. How can you have a problem with that?
This is just speculation, but given that the final versions of these scenes are not voiced, I'm wondering if they were rewritten at the last minute. There's also an unused, fully voiced cutscene of Joker and Akechi talking at the jazz club, which was probably meant to be his third awakening. In the final game, his third awakening is part of the story. This implies it originally would have been optional like the rest of the team.
At any rate, I want to thank you about the deal we made on the ship. Shido was arrested in our reality after his heart was changed by the Phantom Thieves. Could this really be? For so long, I've wanted to crush him. But it seems like you took care of that for me. Maruki may claim to be distorting reality so as to grant the wishes of society at large. However, that's still nothing more than the most convenient path to attaining his wishes. It's no different from Shido. I will never accept this form of reality. I'm done being manipulated. Let's go back to our true reality.
There are some unused scenes depicting a harem Valentine's Day and harem White Day for Joker accepting Maruki's reality. But if you rejected it, you'd get this additional scene with Ryuji on Valentine's Day, along with this scene where all the adult confidants throw Joker a party at the Crossroads bar. And now, this fascinating scene. It uses a background that is not seen anywhere else, and has two people discuss someone at a rehabilitation center. It's stored alongside the scenes where Joker's confidants help bail him out of prison, implying it was meant to be part of it, and most people think the young man discussed here is Akechi, thus implying that he is indeed alive in the true ending. Finally, some unused cutscenes of the Phantom Thieves just chilling. These could have been part of the story, or they could have been optional events. One has Ryuji, Morgana, and Arn at karaoke. One is at the diner, one is at the park. And in Royal, there's one in Kichijoji. And one has Haru and Yusuke going to Harajuku and meeting Lala. Unfortunately, these two would have shown up again. Maybe for the best this was cut. You can't study with Futaba and Haru, but they both have unused study hangouts. Makoto also has a study hangout at the diner, which goes unused because she won't offer to study there in the final version. There are also some unused Maruki counseling sessions floating around on YouTube, but like the supposed Ryuji scene, I won't be discussing it as I can't find it listed on cut content websites. You're welcome to check them out though, they are interesting. And that's it for cut story scenes. Finally, some miscellaneous details. Some unused text implies a few characters went by different names earlier in development. Some of the party code names changed. Ryuji's was originally Reaper, Arn's was originally Papillon, Akechi's was originally Karasu, which is referenced in the final, and Sumire's was originally Clown. Unused confidant text lists a Taichi Nishima, a classmate who quit the volleyball team, who probably became Yuki Mishima, Akemi Gunji, doctor of Gunji Clinic, probably an early name for Takemi, and Kaoru Hatakeyama. Given they own an antique shop and the name Kaoru was used for Iwai's adopted son, this was probably a predecessor to Iwai. There's also some content that is not strictly unused but was changed between versions. The Japanese version featured an anti-piracy warning on starting the game. The textures of this still exist in the files of the localization, but the text was replaced with a link to the game's manual and the whole thing is never even used. I wonder if they thought this warning would come across as tone-deaf given the way the game opens. The Korean version removes the Raido Kuzunoha DLC outfits, the small rising sun emblem from Ryuji's shoes, and alters the almighty skill icon, due to their resemblance to World War II era Japanese iconography, which Korea has understandable issues with. However, these changes are in all of the 2022 re-releases, making the Raido outfits essentially PlayStation exclusive. And that'll be it for Persona 5's unused content. But before we leave, I want to talk about a piece of unused content from a different game related to Persona 5. Did you know that Joker could have been in Persona 4 Arena Ultimax? There's unused voice clips of the Ultimax announcer saying,
P5 Hero, Persona 5 Hero, Mephistopheles.
Which would date these to Persona 5's earliest concepts, where the German demon Mephistopheles was the protagonist persona rather than Arsene. At least he got the chance to steal the show in another fighting game. I hope you've enjoyed this look into the what could have been of Persona 5, and I'll see you all next time.